So we're going to dive right into some examples of what the code looks like. So this is how you declare a variable in Kotlin. We can create, uh, this is just creating an integer variable. You start with the keyword var, followed by the name of the variable, num, followed by colon, and then the data type, which is int. And then you set it equal to the value you want. This is different from, for example, Java, where you might put the data type to begin with. Here you start with var. Now, this is a mutable variable. So this variable can change values later on in your code. There's also immutable variables in Kotlin. So you declare those with the val keyword. So you say val and then the variable name and so forth. And this is similar to the final keyword in Java. So once you assign a value to this variable, you cannot change it later on. Otherwise, the compiler will throw an exception. And this is really for your own benefit. So where possible, try to use immutable variables. So try to use val over var. So if you're only going to use a variable once, or it's like a local, you're declaring the variable in like a local function or something like that, use val, and that will just make sure that it's intended to stay at that value and won't change. Oh, another thing I want to point out is in the second variable declaration, it is a string, but with type inference in Kotlin, it guesses that it is a string, so you don't need to specify colon string. So less typing. All right, and I just listed some of the basic data types in Kotlin. You can look them up on the Kotlin documentation site for the other ones, but just the common ones that you might already be familiar with, like float, long, short, different things like that, char, string, Boolean, things like that. And also notice that int is capitalized, same with double. If you're familiar with Java, you have like the primitive data types like lowercase int and stuff like that. And here, there is no lowercase int. You use capital I for int. And the way that Kotlin does it is it appears like an object, these basic data types, but actually in the underlying representation, they use a primitive to store the data. So what is a bonus though, because it acts like an object, you can call methods on the data. So for an integer, you could just call .toString. You don't have to like cast it or anything or put it in an object. And so it's really handy. And you just find all sorts of use cases for it, and you just like start to take it for granted. All right, and these are some of the operators that are in Kotlin, the familiar ones if you have already done other programming language, the mathematical operators, assignment, comparison, things like that. And this is what a simple program looks like. We have a main function. Every Kotlin program requires a main function as the entry point of execution. And so here our main function just prints hello world to the output. And in other, for example, Java, you might know the main function has like input string args, and that in this case, in Kotlin, those args are actually optional, so you can remove those, and you have an even simpler program. All right, so now let's talk about functions. If you have questions on what I've covered so far, feel free to, again, leave a comment below. I'm going to be talking about functions now, and they're very powerful in Kotlin. So let's go through an example. So we have a main function, and I'm going to declare another function here. This one is called add numbers. And whenever you declare a function in Kotlin, you have to use the fun keyword. So use fun and then the name of the function. And then in parentheses, you can put the input parameters. And you want to specify the name of the input parameter as well as the data type of the parameter. So remember the name first and then the colon and then the data type. And then if there's a return type, you should do colon and then the return type. And then you'll have the curly braces and then put the function body in there. in this case, the function just adds the two input parameters and returns that value. So we have the return keyword to return a value. If there is no return value, then you would just omit the return type. You don't need to like say void, which you would do in Java. So let's use this function that we just created. We can create a number variable like we've seen before and another number variable. This one doesn't have the int type specified. That's totally fine. And then you call the add number function with the two inputs, the two numbers, and then you get a result and store it in the val total. And then you can print that to the output. And when in this line where we're printing to the output, it's actually a string template. So a string template can contain, the text that we see here, but then you can also put variables in the string template. So if you use the $ symbol and then the name of the variable, sometimes you'll see curly braces around the name of the variable, then you just put it in and then it will appear there in the output or in the evaluation of this expression. So if you run this program, this is what you would see: sum of two numbers, and then 30, which is the sum of those two numbers. So string templates are useful. You just get used to them with more practice, and then it just saves you time instead of like string concatenation with like quotes and pluses and things like that. So just a handy tip. All right, so other things you can do, there's so many things you could do with functions in Kotlin, but I'm just trying to highlight a few here. You can have compact functions, and you can see a function that has that doubles the input, can actually be shortened. If there's a single line in the function body, you can just put it all on one line and do an equal sign. So that's what a compact function is. Also, lambdas, you can have a function that is an expression and then store that in a variable. And you can see how you can define a lambda here with the inputs, a function arrow, and then the code to execute. And then also, you can pass functions as input to other functions, or you can have functions return functions. Those are called higher order functions. So really, you can just, it's really powerful. In Kotlin, we call it functions as a first class citizen. So you can kind of just pass functions around. And so you can see here, the encode method basically takes a string, but also a function as a second parameter. And then you can apply that encode, that function that you just got as input, and apply that in the function body. So that's it, highlighting the parameter, and then just how you would call that higher order function.